Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Whitlock, but everyone calls me Jimmy. I've been a ranger here in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old hills could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, you name it. My grandfather used to tell me stories about these mountains when I was little, tales of spirits and monsters hiding in the deep hollows. I always figured they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off alone. I should have listened to those stories. It was October 1973, and the leaves were turning that perfect gold and red that brings tourists from all over. I was sitting in my cabin near Deep Creek, filling out paperwork, when the call came in. 3 college kids from the University of Tennessee had been missing for 3 days. Botany students, the report said. Last radio contact came from somewhere near what the locals call Hunger Hollow, a place that's not even on our official maps. The hollow got its name from the old-timers. They said people who went in there came out different, if they came out at all. My Cherokee friend, Tom Sequoia, always warned me to stay away from that place. Bad things happened there long ago, he'd say. The land remembers. But I'm a practical man. Been through 4 years in Vietnam, seen real horrors. I don't believe in ghost stories. My job is to find lost people and bring them home safe. That morning, I met up with Dale Morrison, a rookie ranger who'd only been on the job for 6 months. Dale was 23, eager as a hunting dog and green as spring grass. He kept checking his equipment over and over: radio, first aid kit, rope, flashlight. Kid was nervous, and I didn't blame him. These mountains can swallow people whole if you don't respect them. We loaded up my truck and headed toward Deep Creek. The drive should have taken 20 minutes, but something felt off from the start. The radio kept crackling with static, and I noticed we hadn't seen a single bird all morning. In October, this place should be thick with migrating songbirds. Instead, there was just silence. The trail to Hunger Hollow starts about 3 miles from Bryson City, winding through thick rhododendron bushes and past old chestnut stumps that have been dead since the blight took them 40 years ago. The hollow sits between 2 ridges, narrow and deep, where the sun barely reaches even at noon. As we hiked in, Dale kept talking to fill the silence. "You really think we'll find them alive?" he asked. I touched the silver cross hanging around my neck, a gift from my grandfather, blessed by Tom's grandmother back when she was still alive. "We'll find them," I said. But something cold was settling in my gut, and it wasn't the October chill. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No rustling leaves, no squirrel chatter, nothing. Just our boots crunching on the trail and Dale's nervous breathing. The air felt thick, like before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. When we reached the edge of Hunger Hollow, I stopped. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees, and my compass was acting strange. The needle kept swinging back and forth like it couldn't decide which way was north. "Jimmy," Dale whispered, pointing down into the hollow. "Look." Through the trees, I could see a flash of orange. A tent. The missing students' campsite. We found their camp in a small clearing about halfway down into the hollow. 3 tents set up in a neat triangle, a cold fire pit in the center, and camp chairs arranged like the kids had just stepped away for a minute. But something was wrong with the picture. Coffee was still sitting in metal cups on the wooden table they'd made from a fallen log. When I touched one cup, it was warm. Not hot, but warm, like someone had been drinking from it may be an hour ago. That made no sense. These kids had been missing for 3 days. "Maybe they just got back," Dale suggested, but his voice was shaky. I shook my head. "Look around." No. Footprints leading away from camp. No sign they ever left. The food was still laid out too. Sandwiches, chips, apples. In 3 days, every critter in the forest should have torn through those supplies, but they sat there, untouched, not even a nibble mark from a mouse. Dale was checking the tents. "Their sleeping bags are here," he called out. Clothes, backpacks, everything. It's like they just vanished. I tried the radio. Static. Nothing but static and what sounded like... No, that was probably just interference. Couldn't be screaming. I told myself it couldn't be screaming. That's when I noticed the trees. On the oak tree closest to their camp, about 12 feet up, were claw marks. Deep gouges in the bark, like something with claws the size of kitchen knives had been scratching at it. But no bear in these mountains could reach that high, and the marks were too clean, too deliberate. Dale, come look at this. He walked over, craned his neck up at the scratches. What could make marks like that? I was about to say I didn't know when I spotted something else. Wedged in the bark right at eye level was a tooth, a human tooth, with the root still bloody. My mouth went dry. I used my knife to pry it loose, wrapped it in my handkerchief. The tooth was a molar, looked like it had been ripped right out of someone's mouth. We need to call for backup, Dale said. I tried the radio again, still static, but this time I definitely heard something else mixed in. Voices, maybe, crying, or screaming. The sound made my skin crawl. Radio's dead, I told him. We'll have to hike back up and call from the truck. But as we turned to leave, Dale grabbed my arm. Listen. From somewhere deeper in the hollow came a sound I'll never forget. It was like wind through the trees, but underneath it was something else. Whispers. Words I couldn't quite make out, in a language that sounded old and sad and angry all at once. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. I could see my breath now, even though it was probably 60 degrees when we'd started hiking. We're leaving, I said. Now. But as we headed back up the trail, I heard something that stopped me cold. A voice, clear as day, calling from down in the hollow. Help us, please. We're down here. It was a girl's voice, young and scared. One of the missing students. Dale started running toward the sound, but I caught his arm. Something wasn't right. The voice had come from at least a quarter mile away, but in this hollow it should have echoed off the ridges. Instead, it sounded like it was coming from right next to us. Help! Can anyone hear us? The voice came again, but this time it seemed to be coming from behind us. Then from our left, then from above. Dale was looking around wildly. Which way? Which way is it coming from? I drew my service weapon, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. My grandfather's cross was getting warm against my chest, something that had never happened before. That's when we saw her. About 50 yards down the trail, a young woman stumbled into view. Asian, maybe 20 years old, wearing a University of Tennessee sweatshirt. She was walking funny, like she was hurt. Sarah! Dale called out. I'd seen her picture in the missing person report. Sarah Kim, botany major from Knoxville. But as she got closer, I could see something was terribly wrong. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't looking at us. She was looking through us. And her mouth was moving, but the voice asking for help was still coming from somewhere else in the hollow. I grabbed Dale before he could run to her. That's not her, I whispered. Sarah Kim, or whatever was wearing her face, turned and walked back into the trees like she hadn't seen us at all. We ran back to the truck, and I mean ran. Dale kept looking over his shoulder, and I kept my hand on my gun. The whole way up I could hear that voice calling for help, but now it sounded like multiple voices, all crying out from different directions. When we reached the parking area, I got on the truck radio and called for backup. Sheriff's Department, Park Service, anyone who could help. Within 2 hours, we had a full search team, 4 deputies, 2 more rangers, and a K-9 unit. The dogs should have been our first clue that something was seriously wrong. When we led them to the edge of Hunger Hollow, both German shepherds started whining and backing away. These were dogs trained to find bodies in collapsed buildings, dogs that had never shown fear of anything. But they wouldn't go down that trail. They cowered behind their handlers, shaking like they'd seen something that scared them down to their bones. Sheriff Bradley decided we'd go in anyway. Probably just a bear down there, he said. Dogs can smell it. I didn't argue, but I kept thinking about those claw marks 12 feet up the tree. This time we found more than an abandoned campsite. About 100 yards past where Dale and I had turned back, we found Sarah Kim for real. She was buried under a pile of leaves near a creek, but not buried deep, like something had tried to hide her but gave up halfway through. I'd seen dead bodies before, too many in Vietnam. But Sarah was different. She had bite marks on her arms and neck, human-sized bite marks. And her abdomen had been opened, torn open. Parts were missing. Deputy Collins lost his lunch right there in the creek. Sheriff Bradley just stood there staring, his face white as paper. "What kind of animal does that?" Dale asked. I didn't answer because I was pretty sure no animal had done this. The bite marks were too deliberate, too precise, and there were finger marks in the dirt around her body like human hands had been digging. We were bagging the evidence when we heard Dale scream. He'd wandered about 20 yards away from the group, following what looked like a trail of disturbed leaves. When we reached him, he was pointing up at an oak tree. The second student, Marcus Webb from the missing person report, was hanging from a branch about 15 feet up. But he wasn't hanging from a rope. His own intestines had been used to string him up, wrapped around his neck and tied to the branch. And the sick thing was, his body had been arranged to form a shape against the tree. I didn't recognize it at first, but Tom Sequoia had taught me some Cherokee symbols over the years. This one meant warning, or stay away. That's when the whispers started again. This time, all 6 of us heard them. Cherokee words, floating through the air like they were being spoken right next to our ears. Deputy Martinez knew some Cherokee from his grandmother. "They're saying hungry," he translated. Over and over. "They're saying they're hungry." The temperature was dropping fast now. We could all see our breath, and frost was forming on the leaves even though it was still afternoon. Sheriff Bradley ordered everyone to stay together. We find the third student and we get out of here. But as we moved deeper into the hollow, our electronic equipment started failing. Radios filled with static and screaming sounds. Flashlights flickered and died even with fresh batteries. My compass was spinning like a top. And then we started seeing them. Just glimpses at first, out of the corner of your eye, thin figures moving between the trees. They looked almost human, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, like people who'd been stretched out. Deputy Collins saw one clearly and described it later. "It looked like a Confederate soldier," he said, "but I could see right through him, and he was chewing on something." That's when we found Marcus's campsite. Unlike the others, his tent was shredded to pieces, claw marks everywhere, and the smell. The smell was like rotten meat mixed with something else, something sweet and wrong. We found the third student, Amy Chen, sitting with her back against a tree. She was alive, but barely. Her body temperature was so low she should have been dead, and her pulse was almost nothing. When we tried to talk to her, she just stared at us with empty eyes. "How long have you been here?" I asked her. Her mouth moved, and words came out, but they weren't her words. The voice was deep, male, with a southern accent from maybe 100 years ago. "So hungry," she said in that old voice. "Been so hungry for so long." That's when Deputy Martinez started screaming. He was pointing behind us, and when I turned, I saw them clearly for the first time. 3 figures stood at the edge of the clearing. They wore Confederate gray uniforms that hung in tatters from their skeletal frames. You could see their ribs through the torn cloth, and their faces. Their faces were just hollow holes where eyes and mouths should be. But they were moving, walking toward us with jerky, wrong movements like marionettes controlled by a drunk puppeteer, and they were hungry. I could feel their hunger like a physical thing pressing against my chest. Sheriff Bradley drew his gun and started shooting. The bullets passed right through the figures like they were made of smoke, but they kept coming. One of them opened what should have been its mouth, and the sound that came out was like wind through a graveyard. "Run!" I shouted. We grabbed Amy between us and ran toward the trail, but the hollow had changed. Paths that had been clear were now blocked by fallen trees. The creek had moved. Even the trees looked different, younger, like we'd gone back in time. And everywhere, more figures were appearing. Dozens of them, all wearing pieces of Civil War uniforms, all impossibly thin and hungry. Deputy Collins tripped and fell. When he got up, his eyes had gone completely black. "I know you," he said to me in that same old accent Amy had used. "You got Whitlock blood in you. Your kin was with us, in the winter of '64. My blood ran cold. My great-great-grandfather had been in the Civil War, but family stories said he'd deserted and disappeared in the mountains." "We starved," Collins continued, but his voice was changing, getting older and sadder. "Winter of 1864, hiding from the Union patrol. Game was scarce. Snow was deep. We got so hungry. The silver cross around my neck was burning hot now. I pulled it out, and the figures backed away like I'd pulled a torch. We ate what we could find," the thing wearing Collins' face said. "Started with the horses. Then, I understood. These soldiers had turned to cannibalism to survive, and somehow they'd never stopped being hungry. The Cherokee medicine man found us." Collins' voice was barely a whisper now. "Cursed us. Said we'd hunger forever, never able to eat enough, never able to die." More of our search team was being possessed. Dale's eyes went black, and he started walking toward me with his hands reaching out like claws. That's when Tom Sequoia appeared. I'd never been so happy to see anyone in my life. Tom stepped out from behind a tree carrying a bundle of burning sage and muttering in Cherokee. The smoke from the sage made the hungry spirits retreat, and Dale collapsed, his eyes normal again. "I felt the disturbance," Tom said. "The blood moon tonight is making them stronger." Above us, through the canopy, I could see the moon rising even though it was still afternoon. It was deep red, the color of old blood. "How do we stop them?" I asked. Tom looked at the cross in my hand. It was glowing now, actually giving off light. "That cross was blessed by my grandmother to protect your family line. But to end this, you have to face the one who leads them." As if summoned by his words, a figure stepped out from the deepest part of the hollow. Unlike the others, this one looked solid, real. He wore a Confederate captain's uniform and had the same face I saw in the mirror every morning, just older and thinner. Captain Jeremiah Whitlock, my great-great-grandfather. "Boy," he said in a
voice like wind through dry leaves, "you don't know what hunger is. We've been feeding on lost folks for over 100 years, and it's never enough. Tonight, with the blood moon, we can finally leave this place. Spread out through all the mountains." The other hungry spirits were forming a circle around us. Amy was still alive but barely breathing. Dale and the deputies were unconscious but alive. "You can join us," Captain Whitlock said. "Family should stick together. Feel what real hunger is like." I looked at Tom, then at the glowing cross in my hand. I thought about my wife Mary Beth, my 2 boys waiting at home. I thought about all the hikers who'd gone missing in these mountains over the years. "No," I said. "This ends tonight." I held up the cross, and its light grew brighter. The hungry spirits writhed and screamed, but Captain Whitlock just smiled. "That little trinket can't destroy us, boy. Only keep us at bay." "You're right," I said. "It can't destroy you. But it can give you what you really want." I stepped closer to him, the cross burning so hot it was searing my palm. "You're not really hungry for food, are you? You're hungry for peace. For rest. For forgiveness." For just a moment, Captain Whitlock's hollow face looked human again. Sad and tired and so very old. "I'm sorry for what you did," I told him. "I'm sorry for what it made you become. But it's time to rest now." I pressed the burning cross against his chest, and light exploded through the hollow. When the light faded, the hungry spirits were gone. All of them. The hollow was just a hollow again, cold October air, the sound of a creek babbling, a few late birds calling in the distance. Captain Whitlock stood in front of me for one more second, looking human and whole. He nodded once, then faded away like morning mist. Amy Chen woke up with normal color in her cheeks and no memory of the last THRE days. The deputies and Dale came around confused but alive. We told them there had been a gas leak from an old mine shaft, caused hallucinations. They seemed to buy it. We brought out the bodies of Sarah Kim and Marcus Webb. The official report listed the cause of death as bear attack, though any expert could have told you no bear made those marks. 2 weeks later, the Park Service quietly designated Hunger Hollow as an environmentally sensitive area, and closed it to public access. They put up signs about protecting rare plant species, but I knew the real reason. Tom Sequoia visited me at home a month after it happened. We sat on my porch drinking coffee while my boys played in the yard. There are other places like that hollow, he told me. Other cursed sites from the war. You've got a gift now, Jimmy. That cross changed you when it burned the curse away. He was right. I could feel things now that I couldn't before. Cold spots that meant something unnatural. The weight of eyes watching from empty forests. The difference between natural silence and the silence of the dead. Will I have to face them all? I asked. Tom sipped his coffee. Maybe. Or maybe you'll teach others to face them. Your boys got some of that sensitivity in them too. I can tell. I looked at my sons, 7-year-old Michael and 5-year-old Danny, chasing each other around the oak tree in our front yard. Michael stopped suddenly and looked toward the mountains, like he'd heard something I couldn't hear. That night, I started writing down everything that had happened in Hunger Hollow. Mary Beth thought I was writing hunting stories, and I let her think that. But I was really creating a record, a guide for anyone else who might have to face the things that hide in the deep places of these mountains. Because Tom was right, there are other cursed places out there. Other hungers that need to be fed or put to rest. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing just right, I can hear them calling. My name is James Whitlock, and I'm a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains.
I used to think the old stories were just folklore, tales to scare children away from dangerous places. Now I know better. Now I know some hungers never die. They just wait in the dark for someone foolish enough to feed them. But I also know that sometimes, if you're brave enough and have the right tools, you can put those hungers to rest. The cross my grandfather gave me hangs around my neck still, though it doesn't glow anymore. Tom says it will when I need it to. He's teaching me other things too. Cherokee protection rituals, how to read the signs that mark cursed ground, how to tell the difference between natural death and supernatural hunger. Because somewhere out there in the mountains, in hollows that don't appear on any map, other hungry things are waiting, and when people go missing in those places, they'll call a ranger. They'll call me. My name is Elizabeth Thornfield, but everyone calls me Libby. I've been a park ranger for 8 years now, and I was the first woman to get this job in our district. Some folks still think I don't belong out here in the mountains, but I've proved them wrong more times than I can count. I grew up in these hills after my parents died in a car crash when I was 7. My grandmother raised me, and she knew every plant, every trail, every story these mountains held. She was the local midwife and taught me about mountain remedies, which herbs could stop bleeding, which ones could calm a fever. Before I became a ranger, I worked as an emergency medical technician. I know how to save lives, and I'm not afraid of much. At 29, I'm strong from years of rock climbing. My red hair stands out like a beacon on the mountain trails, and I always carry my medical backpack wherever I go. The other rangers joke that I'm prepared for anything, but out here you have to be. Roan Mountain is special. At 6,285 feet, it's one of the highest peaks in North Carolina. The summit is covered in grassy balds, big open areas with no trees where you can see for miles in every direction. In June, the rhododendrons bloom pink and white like nature's own garden. Cherokee people used to travel through here on ancient trails marked with stone cairns that still stand today. The mountain has history. Back in 1780, during the Revolutionary War, some fighting happened up here. The Overmountain men passed through on their way to battle. Local stories say a woman died up there that year, screaming for her lost lover. My grandmother used to tell me those tales, but I never believed them. Banshee stories are Irish nonsense, I'd tell her. They got no place in our mountains. I was wrong about that. It started in August 1981. We got multiple 911 calls about a woman screaming on Roan Mountain. Not just one call, dozens. Campers, hikers, even people driving the mountain roads at night said they heard her. A married couple came down from their campsite at 3 a.m, shaking and crying. They said a woman had been screaming outside their tent all night, but when they looked out, nobody was there. My supervisor wanted to send 2 of the male rangers to check it out, but I volunteered to go alone. I was tired of being treated like I needed protection. I can handle one scared camper, I told him. I packed my usual gear, medical kit, climbing equipment, emergency radio, and my .38 revolver, just in case. The drive up to Roan Mountain takes about an hour on winding roads. As I got higher, I noticed the air felt wrong. Heavy, like before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. My grandmother always said animals know things before people do, and I saw what she meant that day. No birds were singing. The squirrels and chipmunks that usually scattered across the road were nowhere to be seen. I parked at the trailhead and started hiking up to the summit. The first thing I found was wrong. 3 campsites sat abandoned on the lower slopes. The tents were still there, but they'd been torn open from the inside. Not ripped by claws or cut by knives, torn by human hands in a panic. Personal belongings were scattered everywhere, sleeping bags, cooking pots, family photos, even car keys, but no people. I called out, thinking maybe the campers were just hiding. "Hello, this is Park Ranger Thornfield. Is anyone hurt?" My voice echoed off the rocks, but nobody answered back. I picked up a child's stuffed bear from the ground. It was soaked with dew, like it had been there all night. A chill ran down my spine. Families don't just abandon their children's toys. The fog started rolling in as I climbed higher, which was strange. The weather report had called for clear skies all week. This fog was different too, thicker than normal, with a yellowish tint that made everything look sick. And the rhododendrons were blooming in August. They're supposed to bloom in June. My radio crackled to life. "Base to Ranger Thornfield, come in." I grabbed the radio. "This is Thornfield. I'm at the abandoned campsites. Found some strange stuff up here." But instead of my supervisor's voice, I heard something else. Old-fashioned speech, like from a history movie. "William? William, where art thou? I have searched these hills for thee." I stared at the radio. "Base, did you copy that transmission?" "Copy what? You're coming through fine, Libby." I shook my head and kept climbing. My altimeter started acting up, showing readings that made no sense. According to the device, I was 200 feet below sea level. That was impossible. I was on top of a mountain. Higher up the trail, I found hair caught on thorny bushes. Long, dark hair, but it was hanging 8 feet off the ground. No woman I knew was that tall. I took out my pocket knife and cut some strands to bag as evidence. The hair felt strange, too coarse, and it smelled like rotting flowers. That's when I found the footprints. They were bare human feet, woman-sized, pressed into the muddy ground near a stream. But the prints looked wrong. Instead of normal pink flesh marks, these showed dark, decomposed skin with bones visible underneath. I knelt down to get a better look, and that's when I heard it. The scream. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. A woman's voice, high and desperate, full of pain that made my bones ache. The sound bounced off the rocks in ways that shouldn't have been possible, like it was coming from above and below at the same time. My hands shook as I grabbed my radio. "Base, this is Thornfield. I need backup up here right now." "What's your situation, Libby?" Before I could answer, I saw a figure through the fog. A woman in a white dress, standing about 50 yards away near the tree line. She was pointing toward a dark opening in the rocks that I'd never noticed before. Some kind of cave. "Hello," I called out. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The woman turned toward me and I saw her face. Half of it was gone. I blinked hard, and she was gone too. My radio crackled again. "Libby, come in. What's your situation?" I think I found our screaming woman," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we've got a bigger problem up here. I'm going to need the coroner too." Because at the base of a 50-foot cliff, I'd just spotted a body. The dead man was about 30 years old, dressed in camping gear. He'd fallen from the cliff above, but his face told a different story than a simple accident. His eyes were wide open, mouth stretched in a silent scream, like he'd seen something so terrible it literally scared him to death. I checked for a pulse, even though I knew it was pointless. His body was cold, probably dead since last night. But there were no injuries except from the fall. No heart attack symptoms, no signs of a struggle. He'd just died of fear. My medical training kicked in. I started taking photos and notes, treating this like any other accident scene. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept looking over my shoulder. The fog was getting thicker. I could barely see 20 feet in any direction now. And the screaming had started again. Not just one voice, but several, all crying out in harmony like some twisted choir. My radio burst with static. Then a woman's voice came through clearly. "Have you seen my William? I've been searching so long." "Base, are you getting these radio transmissions?" I asked. "Negative, Libby. Your signal's getting weak up there." I tried to call for the backup team, but now my radio was only picking up more voices. Men and women speaking in old-fashioned accents, talking about battles and lost loves and searching for someone in the hills. A scream echoed from somewhere above. Me on the cliffs. Not the ghostly woman this time. This sounded real, human, and terrified. I looked up and saw a figure stumbling along the rocky ledge. A woman with dark hair, wearing modern clothes. "Help me," she called down. "I can't find my way. She won't let me leave." I started climbing toward her using the rock climbing skills I'd learned over the years. The stone was slippery from the fog, and more than once my hands slipped on surfaces that should have been dry. "Stay where you are," I called up. "I'm coming to get you." But when I reached the ledge, she was gone. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Just more of that strange hair caught on the rocks and the smell of rotting flowers. I was starting to doubt my own eyes when I heard voices below. The backup team had finally arrived, 2 male rangers from our district, Tom and Jake. I could see their flashlight beams cutting through the fog. "Up here," I called down. "I found a body." Their lights swung toward my voice, and I started climbing back down. But as I got closer, I heard them talking in panicked whispers. "Did you see her?" Tom was saying. "That woman in the white dress?" "She was right there," Jake replied. "Then she just disappeared." "There's something wrong with this place, Tom. We need to get out of here." By the time I reached them, both men were white as sheets. Tom kept looking around nervously, and Jake was clutching his radio like it was a lifeline. "What happened to you guys?" I asked. "We saw her," Tom said. "The woman everyone's been calling about. She was standing right by our truck when we got here, just staring at us. But when we got closer, her eyes were glowing," Jake finished. "And her face, Jesus, Libby, half her face was rotted away." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. They'd seen her too, the same woman I'd glimpsed earlier. "We need to document everything and get off this mountain," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Help me examine the body, then we'll head back down." But as we approached the dead camper, we found something that made all 3 of us stop cold. He wasn't alone anymore. A woman knelt beside the body, wearing a torn white dress that might have been beautiful 200 years ago. Her long dark hair was woven with mountain flowers that had wilted and turned black. She was stroking the dead man's face with one pale hand and singing softly in a voice like wind through dead leaves. She looked up at us with eyes that glowed like fireflies and smiled with a mouth full of broken teeth. "Have you seen my William?" she asked in that same old-fashioned accent I'd heard on the radio. "I've been searching for him such a long time." Tom and Jake both turned and ran. I heard them crashing through the bushes, getting farther away with every second. Their flashlights disappeared into the fog, leaving me alone with whatever this thing was. The woman stood up slowly, never taking those glowing eyes off me. Up close, I could see that Jake was right. Half her face was decomposed, showing bone and rotted flesh underneath. But the other half was still beautiful, with smooth skin and full lips. "You're Martha Caldwell," I said, remembering my grandmother's stories. "You died up here in 1780, looking for your lost love." She smiled wider, and I saw maggots crawling between her teeth. "You know me," she whispered. "Then you know why I must find him, why I cannot rest." "William is dead," I told her, backing away slowly. "He died in the war over 200 years ago." Her face changed then, twisting with rage. The scream that came from her mouth was so loud and piercing that I fell to my knees, clutching my ears. Every piece of electronic equipment I carried, radio, flashlight, even my watch, started emitting the same shrieking sound. When it stopped, Martha was gone. But I could hear her voice carried on the wind. "Find him for me, or join him yourself." Was alone on the mountain with the dead, and I was starting to understand that I might not make it down alive. I stumbled through the fog for what felt like hours, trying to find my way back to the trail. My equipment was useless now. The radio only screamed static, my flashlight flickered weakly, and my compass spun in circles. But I could hear Martha calling out constantly, sometimes close, sometimes far away. "William, William, where are you? Come back to me." I remembered my grandmother's teachings about mountain spirits and started feeling in my backpack for the herbs she'd taught me to carry. Wild ginseng, mountain laurel flowers, and something she called spirits begone, a mixture of local plants that was supposed to keep ghosts away. I'd always thought it was silly folk medicine, but right now I was willing to try anything. As soon as I pulled out the small cloth bag of herbs, the mountain laurel flowers inside started wilting and turning black. The temperature around me dropped at least 20 degrees, and I could see my breath in the sudden cold. Martha appeared right in front of me, so close I could smell the decay on her breath. "You carry the old woman's magic," she hissed. "Your blood remembers the old ways." "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Help me find William, or become him yourself." Her rotted hand reached toward my face. "I am so lonely, child. So very lonely." I backed away, holding the herb bag between us like a shield. "Tell me about William. Tell me what happened." Her glowing eyes softened slightly. "He was beautiful," she whispered. "Golden hair like summer wheat, eyes blue as mountain sky. We were to be married when he returned from the war. But he didn't come back. The others said he died at King's Mountain, fighting the British. But I knew they were wrong. I knew he would come back to me." Her voice turned desperate. I waited and waited. I searched these hills until my feet bled and my dress turned to rags. I called his name until my throat was raw. "How did you die, Martha?" Winter came early that year. I was still searching, still calling for him. The cold took me slowly, but I didn't care. Even death couldn't make me stop looking. She stared at me with those terrible, glowing eyes. And now others come to these mountains, and I see William in their faces. I try to keep them with me, but they always try to leave. I understood now. The dead camper, the abandoned sites, all the people who'd heard her screaming. Martha was trying to replace her lost love with anyone who reminded her of him, and when they tried to escape, she killed them. "Martha, I can help you find William," I said carefully, "but I need you to show me exactly where you last saw him." Her whole demeanor changed. Hope flickered in her dead eyes. "You would do this? You would help me?" "I would, but no more hurting innocent people. Promise me." She nodded eagerly, and suddenly the fog began to clear. Martha led me higher up the mountain to places I'd never seen before, through passages between rocks that seemed to open just for her. We climbed for another hour until we reached a hidden valley near the very summit. "Here," she said, pointing to a dark opening in the cliff face. "This is where the men said they buried him. But when I looked, he wasn't there." The cave was narrow and went back farther than my weak flashlight could reach. But as we got closer, I smelled something that made my stomach turn. Old death, bones, and rotted fabric. "Martha, how long ago did you look in this cave?" "Last winter. or the winter before. Time means nothing to me now. I realized she might have looked in this cave 50 years ago, or 100. If William's body was here, it would be nothing but bones by now. Inside the cave, my flashlight beam fell on something that made my heart race. Carved into the rock wall were words. Here lies William Caldwell, died Kings Mountain, 178. 0. Beloved of Martha. Below the carving was a pile of old bones, still wearing the rotted remains of a Revolutionary War uniform. Martha saw it the same time I did. She fell to her knees.
Beside the skeleton, touching the bones with shaking hands. "William," she whispered. "William, is it really you?" For a moment, I thought everything would be okay. I thought she'd found peace and would finally rest. But then her expression changed, and rage twisted her features back into something monstrous. "You left me," she screamed at the bones. "You chose to die for strangers instead of coming home to me. You let me search and suffer and die alone." The cave began to shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling as Martha's fury grew. Her scream was so loud that blood ran from my ears, and I felt like my bones were going to crack. "If I cannot have you in life or death," she shrieked, "then I will drag everyone into the darkness with me." She turned those glowing eyes on me, and I knew I was about to die. That's when I remembered something my grandmother had always told me: the dead can't rest until they forgive, child. Anger keeps them chained to this world. As Martha reached for me with hands that had become claws, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed William's skull from the pile of bones and held it up between us. "Martha, look at him," I said. "Really look at him. He was 18 years old when he died. Just a boy who believed in something bigger than himself." She stopped, staring at the skull in my hands. "He didn't choose to leave you," I continued. "He chose to fight for freedom, for the future you two could have had together. That's not betrayal, that's love." Tears began flowing from her glowing eyes, washing the decay from her cheeks. For just a moment, I saw her as she must have been in life, young, beautiful, and heartbroken. "I've been so angry," she whispered. "For so very long. It's time to let go," I told her gently. "It's time to forgive him, and forgive yourself." Martha reached out and touched William's skull with one finger. As she did, her whole form began to glow with soft, warm light instead of the cold fire that had burned in her eyes. "I forgive you, my love," she whispered. "And I'm ready to come home." The light grew brighter and brighter until I had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, Martha was gone. But for just a second, I could have sworn I saw two figures walking away together into the light, a young woman in a white dress and a soldier in a blue coat, holding hands. The cave stopped shaking. The air warmed up. And for the first time since I'd climbed this mountain, I heard birds singing. I made it down the mountain just as the sun was coming up. Tom and Jake were waiting at the ranger station with our supervisor and a search team, all ready to come look for me. They said they'd heard the screaming stop around midnight and had been worried sick. The official report listed 3 deaths from the incident: the male camper I'd found, ruled accidental fall, an elderly hiker who'd suffered a heart attack during the night, and a young woman whose body we found the next day, exposure. 2 other campers had to be hospitalized for severe psychological trauma. They wouldn't stop screaming for hours and kept talking about seeing a demon woman. We told the families it was altitude sickness and exposure. Some things are easier to explain that way. I went back up to Martha's cave a week later with a proper burial crew. We gave William Caldwell's remains a military funeral with full honors, and I made sure Martha was remembered too. There's a small plaque near the cave entrance now that reads, "In memory of those who loved deeply and suffered long." The screaming on Roan Mountain stopped completely after that night. Campers and hikers report nothing more unusual than the occasional bear or wild turkey. The rhododendrons bloom in June now, like they're supposed to. But I'm different. I Started reading my grandmother's old journals, learning about the folk magic and spirit work that runs in my family. Turns out the Thornfields have been helping restless souls find peace for
generations. I just never knew it was my calling, too. Other rangers from around the Appalachian region started contacting me after word got out about what happened on Roan Mountain. There are more places like this, historical sites where tragedy left spirits trapped between worlds. Revolutionary War battlefields, Civil War hospitals, old mining towns where cave-ins killed dozens of workers. The Forest Service created a new classification for these areas, culturally sensitive sites. They don't say why, but they monitor them more closely now, and they make sure rangers like me, rangers who understand both the natural and supernatural aspects of these mountains, are assigned to patrol them. Some nights, when I'm alone on the trails, I still hear voices on the wind. Not angry or desperate voices like Martha's, but grateful ones. Spirits who have found peace and want to say thank you. My grandmother always said the mountains hold memories, both beautiful and terrible. Now I know she was right. And I know it's my job to help those memories find rest. But I also know that for every spirit we've helped, there are dozens more still out there. Still searching, still suffering, still calling out in the darkness for someone to hear them and understand their pain. That's why I keep my herb bag close, why I've learned the old words my grandmother knew, and why I always listen carefully when other rangers tell me about strange things they've seen on their patrols. Because somewhere out there in these ancient mountains, another Martha is waiting. Another soul is trapped by grief so deep it defies death itself. And when the calls come in about voices in the woods or figures that vanish when you look directly at them, I'll be ready. After all, somebody has to help the dead find their way home. The mountains remember everything. And now, so do I. My name is Michael Ravencrest, but everyone calls me Mick. I've been a park ranger in the Chattahoochee National Forest for 6 years now, and before that I spent 10 years as a detective with the Atlanta Police. People always ask why I left the city for the mountains. The truth is, I got tired of seeing what people could do to each other. Out here, the worst I usually deal with is a lost hiker or someone camping where they shouldn't. I should have known September would be different. The leaves were just starting to turn on Blood Mountain, Georgia's highest peak at 4,458 feet. It's a beautiful place, even with its dark history. The Cherokee used to call it Yane, the place where they cried blood. Some old battle happened there long ago, and the name stuck. Blood Mountain sits right on the Appalachian Trail. Thousands of hikers pass through every year, most of them heading for the stone shelter at the summit. It's popular because of the views, but locals have always said there's something wrong with that mountain. They tell stories about a beast that lives up there, something that's not quite human and not quite animal. I never believed any of that. In my experience, the real monsters were always human. Everything else was just backwoods stories meant to scare tourists. That changed on September 15th, 1989. I was doing my morning rounds when the call came in. A hiker had been found dead near the summit trail. State police were already on their way, but they wanted a ranger there too, since it happened on federal land. I grabbed my investigation kit, old habits from my detective days, camera, evidence bags, plaster for making casts, notepad, and my service weapon. Even though I was a ranger now, I still carried myself like a cop. The gray in my hair and the bullet scar on my shoulder were reminders that the world could be dangerous, even when you were trying to hear. LP, the drive up to the trailhead took 40 minutes. The closer I got to Blood Mountain, the quieter everything became. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. I'd been in these woods for years, and I'd never heard them so still. The victim was a 23-year-old college student named David Chen. He'd been hiking alone, which wasn't smart, but lots of young people thought they were tougher than they were. What I saw when I reached the crime scene made my stomach turn, and I'd seen plenty of bad things in Atlanta. David's body was torn apart. Deep claw marks ran from his chest to his stomach. His backpack was shredded, and his camping gear was scattered everywhere. At first glance, it looked like a bear attack. We had black bears in the area, and they could be dangerous if surprised or protecting cubs, but something felt wrong. I knelt down and looked closer at the wounds. The claw marks were huge, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. But mixed in with them were what looked like bite marks. Human bite marks. I took out my camera and started taking pictures. The flash seemed too bright in the quiet forest. Every photo I took felt like it was disturbing something that wanted to stay hidden. The blood spatter patterns didn't make sense either. I'd worked enough crime scenes to know how blood behaves when someone gets attacked. This looked like David had been thrown around by something impossibly strong. There were spots of blood 15 feet up in the trees. I made plaster casts of the tracks I found. They were massive paw prints, easily twice the size of a normal bear's. But here's what really bothered me. Some of the prints showed what looked like thumbs. Bears don't have opposable thumbs. By the time the state police arrived, I had documented everything I could. Detective Sarah Morrison was the lead investigator, and that she had the same look I used to get when a case didn't add up. "What do you think, Mick?" she asked, looking down at David's body. "Officially, looks like a bear attack. Unofficially, I've never seen a bear do anything like this." We spent the rest of the day going over the scene. The more we looked, the stranger it got. David's tent had been torn open from the inside, like something had been in there with him. His food was still in the bear container, untouched. If a bear had killed him, it would have gone for the food. As the sun started to set, I felt like someone was watching us. The feeling was so strong I kept turning around, expecting to see eyes in the shadows between the trees, but there was nothing there. Just the quiet, empty forest. We packed up the body and headed back down the mountain. I offered to stay and keep an eye on the area, but Detective Morrison said they'd have it covered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those bite marks and the impossible blood patterns. In Atlanta, when something didn't make sense, it usually meant someone was lying or hiding something. But who would lie about a bear attack in the middle of nowhere? I lay in bed listening to the sounds outside my cabin. Usually, the night was full of noise. Owls hooting, raccoons scratching around, the distant howl of coyotes. But tonight, just like at the crime scene, everything was silent. Around 3 a.m, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It started as a low growl, like a bear might make. But then it changed, becoming higher, more human. It sounded like someone screaming in pain and rage at the same time. The sound was coming from the direction of Blood Mountain. 3 days later, we found the second body. This time it was a woman named Lisa Park, 28 years old, an experienced hiker from Tennessee. She'd been found by a group of college kids who were so scared they could barely speak when they called it in. I got to the scene before Detective Morrison. Lisa's body was positioned differently than David's had been. She was sitting upright against a large oak tree, facing directly toward the summit of Blood Mountain. Her eyes were closed, and if not for the massive claw marks across her chest, she might have looked like she was just resting. But it was her face that really bothered me. She looked peaceful, almost like she was smiling. People who die violently don't usually look peaceful. I started taking pictures again. The flash from my camera kept acting strange, overexposing every shot I took near Lisa's body. I checked the settings, changed the batteries, even tried a different camera. Same problem every time. The tracks around Lisa were even more disturbing than the ones at David's scene. There were human footprints mixed in with the massive paw prints. They seemed to change from one to the other, like something had been walking on 2 legs and then dropped to 4. I followed the trail for about 50 yards before it just stopped. Not faded away, stopped. Like whatever made the tracks had just vanished into thin air. When Detective Morrison arrived, she looked tired. Word was getting out about the attacks, and the media was starting to pay attention. The last thing the state wanted was a panic about killer bears in one of Georgia's most popular hiking areas. "Any ideas?" she asked, looking down at Lisa. "Same as before. Looks like a bear attack, but nothing about it makes sense." We spent the morning going over everything again. Lisa's camping gear was torn apart just like David's, But her food was untouched. There were claw marks on nearby trees, some of them 12 feet off the ground. I'd never heard of a bear climbing that high just to scratch bark. Around noon, we had our first witness. Jake Bramlett was a local man who made moonshine up in the hills. He wasn't supposed to be in the national forest, but I'd always looked the other way, as long as he didn't cause trouble. Jacka. He was in his 60s, tough as leather and not easily scared. But when he came walking down the trail toward us, he was white as a sheet. "Mick," he said, his voice shaking. "You need to know what I saw." Jake had been checking his still early that morning when he heard something moving through the woods. At first he thought it was just a regular bear, but then he saw it clearly. It was walking on two legs, Jake said, like a man, but it was covered in dark fur and it was huge, 8 feet tall, maybe more. When it saw me, it dropped down to run like an animal. But its eyes... Jake shuddered. Its eyes looked human. Detective Morrison and I exchanged glances. Jake was known for drinking his own product, but he'd never been one to make up stories. "Which direction was it heading?" I asked. Jake pointed toward the summit of Blood Mountain. "That way, moving fast too, faster than anything that size should be able to move." After Jake left, Morrison and I decided to follow the creature's trail. We radioed our location to headquarters and started up the mountain. The higher we climbed, the stranger things got. The temperature started dropping, even though it was a warm September day. Our breath became visible like we were walking into winter. My compass started spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. We found more evidence of the creature about half a mile up the trail. Trees were marked with claw scratches so deep they went through the bark and into the wood. The marks were arranged in patterns that almost looked like some kind of language. That's when we heard the howling. It started as a low, rumbling roar that I could feel in my chest. Then it changed, becoming higher and more human-like. It was the same sound I'd heard outside my cabin 3 nights ago, but much closer and much louder. The howling seemed to come from everywhere at once. It echoed off the rock faces and bounced between the trees until we couldn't tell where it was coming from. Morrison grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here." I wanted to argue, to keep following the trail. The detective in me needed to know what we were dealing with. But the part of me that had survived 10 years on the streets of Atlanta knew when it was time to retreat. As we started back down the mountain, I looked over my shoulder one more time. There, standing on a rocky outcrop about 200 yards above us, was a dark shape. It was too far away to see clearly, but it was definitely watching us. It was standing on 2 legs, just like Jake had described. That evening, back at the ranger station, I tried to make sense of what we'd experienced. I laid out all the photos, the plaster casts, and my notes. Everything pointed to something that shouldn't exist. Detective Morrison called around 8 o'clock. "Mick, we're going to need more help with this. I've requested a team from the GBI, and the FBI might get involved if we have another incident. What about closing the mountain to hikers? The state's not ready to do that yet. They're worried about the economic impact, but they're posting warnings about increased bear activity." After I hung up, I sat on my porch and listened to the night sounds, or rather, the lack of them. For the 4th night in a row, the forest was completely silent. Whatever was up on Blood Mountain had scared away every living thing for miles around. I went inside and loaded my service weapon with fresh ammunition. I'd been a cop long enough to know that when something seemed impossible, it usually meant you weren't asking the right questions yet. But as I lay in bed that night, one thought kept running through my mind. What if some things really were impossible? What if there were monsters in the world that weren't human? Around midnight, the howling started again. This time, it sounded like it was right outside my cabin. I grabbed my gun and my flashlight and went to the window. The beam of light showed nothing but empty forest, but I could feel something watching me from the darkness, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. The howling came again, closer this time, and buried in that inhuman sound I could have sworn I heard something that chilled me to the bone. It sounded like my name. The 3rd victim was found on September 20th, but this time we didn't find a body. Tommy Rodriguez was a 19-year-old from Florida, hiking the Appalachian Trail with 2 friends. They'd camped near the Blood Mountain summit the night before and were planning to finish their section hike the next day. Tommy's friends woke up to find his tent empty and torn open from the inside. There was blood on the ground, but no body. They followed a trail of blood drops for about a mile before it led into one of the cave systems that honeycombed the mountain. I was the first responder this time. I called Detective Morrison and the state police, but I didn't wait for them to arrive. A missing person was different from a crime scene. If Tommy was still alive, every minute counted. I strapped on my headlamp and entered the cave. The blood trail was easy to follow at first. Dark drops on the limestone floor led deeper into the mountain. But after about 50 feet, the trail changed. The blood drops got bigger and more spread out, like Tommy had been dragged instead of walking. Mixed in with the human blood were tracks I was starting to recognize, the massive paw prints with opposable thumbs. The cave system was larger than I'd expected. Tunnels branched off in different directions, connected by chambers big enough to hold a small house. I'd been in these mountains for years, but I'd never fully explored the caves under Blood Mountain. I followed the main tunnel for maybe a quarter mile before I started hearing sounds, scraping noises, like something big moving around in the darkness ahead. I turned off my headlamp and listened. There was breathing, heavy, labored breathing that echoed off the cave walls. But it wasn't quite right. It was too deep, too slow, like something much larger than a human was trying to breathe quietly. I crept forward in the darkness, using my hands to feel along the cave wall. The breathing got louder as I moved deeper. Then I heard something that made me freeze. A voice. Human, but wrong somehow. It was speaking words I couldn't understand, in a language that sounded old and harsh. The words echoed through the caves, mixing with that heavy breathing. I turned my headlamp back on and immediately wished I hadn't. The tunnel opened into a large chamber. On the far side, maybe 30 yards away, was something that couldn't exist. It looked like a massive bear, but it was standing upright on its hind legs. It had to be 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur that looked almost black in the beam of my light. But its face was wrong. Bears have dog-like faces, but this thing's face was more human, flatter, with eyes that reflected my light like mirrors, and it was holding something in its front paws. Tommy's backpack. The creature turned toward my light, and I saw its mouth open in what might have been a snarl or might have been a grin. Its teeth were huge like a bear's, but they were arranged more like a human's, and when it spoke, the voice was definitely human. "You shouldn't be here, Ranger." I fumbled for my weapon, but my hands were shaking too badly to draw it cleanly. The creature, whatever it was, didn't move. It just stood there, watching me with those human eyes in that animal face. "Where's Tommy?" I managed to ask. The creature tilted its head, like it was thinking. "The boy who ran? He's safe. For now." "What do you want?" "Want?" The creature laughed, and the sound bounced around the cave chamber like thunder. "I want what I've always wanted. Justice. Payment for old debts." Before I could respond, the creature dropped to all fours and disappeared into one of the side tunnels. It moved faster than anything that size should be a sauce. Bleat-2 move, like it knew the cave system by heart. I tried to follow, but the tunnel it had taken was too small for me to crawl through. I called Tommy's name, hoping he might answer, but
there was no response. By the time Detective Morrison and the state police arrived, I'd searched every tunnel I could fit through. We found more blood, scraps of Tommy's clothing, and claw marks on the cave walls. But no Tommy. The claw marks were arranged in patterns again, like some kind of writing. Detective Morrison took pictures, but when we developed them later, every photo of the marks came out blurred, like something had been interfering with the camera. We spent 3 days searching the cave system with a full team, including specialists from the state's cave rescue unit. We found evidence that someone, or something, had been living in the deeper tunnels for a long time. There were bones scattered around, some human, some animal. All of them showed signs of being gnawed on. But we never found Tommy Rodriguez. On September 25th, the state finally agreed to close Blood Mountain to hikers. The official reason was increased dangerous wildlife activity, but word was getting out that something stranger was happening. The media started calling it the Blood Mountain Beast. Reporters came from Atlanta and even some national news outlets. The story was too weird to ignore, hikers being killed by something that left tracks like nothing in any zoology textbook. I was doing an interview with a reporter from CNN when my radio crackled to life. All units, we have another incident at Blood Mountain. Multiple casualties. This time, it was a group of 5 college students from the University of Georgia. They'd ignored the closure and hiked up to the summit anyway. 3 of them had been killed, and 2 were missing. The crime scene was the worst yet. The 3 bodies were arranged in a triangle around the stone shelter at the summit, all facing inward like they'd been positioned that way on purpose. The claw marks on their bodies were deeper than before, and all 3 had that same peaceful expression I'd seen on Lisa Park's face. But it was the blood that really got to me. It wasn't just splattered around randomly. Someone, or something, had used the blood to write on the stone walls of the shelter. The symbols looked like the claw marks we'd found in the cave, but bigger and more elaborate. I was photographing the symbols when Jake Bramlett came running up the trail. He was out of breath and scared out of his mind. "Mick. It's got them other 2 kids. I seen it carrying them toward the caves." "Which caves?" "The big one on the north face. The one the Cherokee used to say was cursed." I radioed for backup and grabbed my gear. Jake led me to a cave entrance I'd never seen before, hidden behind a stand of mountain laurel about half a mile from the summit. "It went in there about an hour ago," Jake said. "Had them kids over its shoulders like they were sleeping bags." This cave was different from the one where I'd lost Tommy's trail. It was older, deeper, and as soon as I stepped inside, I could feel that something was very wrong with it. The temperature was at least 20 degrees colder than outside, and there was a smell in the air like iron and old bones. I'd only gone about 50 feet when I heard voices echoing from deeper in the cave. One of them was human, a young woman crying for help. The other voice was the same in human speech I'd heard before, but louder and more agitated. I followed the sounds through a maze of tunnels that seemed to go on forever. The Cherokee were right, this place felt cursed. Every step I took felt like I was walking deeper into something that didn't belong in the normal world. Finally, the tunnel opened into a huge chamber, bigger than anything I'd seen in the other cave system. And there, in the center of the chamber, was the creature. It was even bigger than I remembered, and this time I could see it clearly. It looked like a cross between a massive bear and a human being, covered in dark fur but standing upright like a person. Its face was the most disturbing part, animal.
Features arranged in an almost human pattern. The 2 missing students were there, tied up but alive. The creature was pacing back and forth in front of them, talking in that strange language. But as I watched, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The creature was changing. Its shape was shifting, becoming more human-like. The fur was receding, the snout was shortening, and its posture was becoming more upright. In the space of maybe 30 seconds, it had transformed from a giant bear thing into something that looked almost like a person. Almost, but not quite. It was still too tall, too broad, and its eyes still reflected light like an animal's. And then it spoke to me in perfect English. "You keep coming back, Ranger." "Why?" I had my weapon drawn, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. This thing had killed 5 people and taken at least 3 more. A pistol wasn't going to stop it. "Let them go," I said. "Take me instead." The creature laughed. "You think this is about them? You think I care about these frightened children? Then what do you want?" The creature stepped closer, and I could see its face more clearly. Beneath the animal features, there was something almost human about its expression. It looked sad. "I want to go home," it said, "but I can't. Not until the debt is paid." "What debt?" The creature's eyes seemed to look right through me. "The same debt you carry, Ranger. The weight of those we failed to save." Before I could ask what it meant, the creature roared, a sound that was part animal, part human, and full of pain. The roar echoed through the chamber, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying outside the cave entrance. The two students were next to me, unconscious but alive. There was no sign of the creature. On the stone wall next to the cave entrance, scratched deep into the rock, was a message in English. "Find me when you're ready to pay your debts, Michael Ravencrest." I knew I had to go back to Atlanta. The creature, whatever it was, knew my name, knew about my past. It had called me a coward who ran from responsibility, and the worst part was, it was right. I'd left the Atlanta Police Department after my partner, Danny Reeves, was killed in a drug bust gone wrong. We'd been chasing a lead on a major dealer, but I'd let Danny go in first while I covered the back exit. By the time I got inside, Danny was already dead. I could have prevented it. Should have been faster, smarter, braver. Instead, I'd let my partner die and then run away to the mountains to hide from the guilt. Before I went back to Blood Mountain, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I drove to the Cherokee Nation's Cultural Center in North Carolina and asked to speak with their eldest elder. Mary Crow Feather was 93 years old and one of the last people who remembered the old stories from her grandmother. When I told her about the creature on Blood Mountain, her face went pale. "You've seen the Kitua," she said. "The cursed one." According to Mary, the creature had once been a Cherokee scout named Sequoia. During the Civil War, he'd been captured by Union forces and agreed to lead them to his village in exchange for his life. The attack had resulted in the massacre of dozens of Cherokee families. "The medicine man cursed him," Mary explained, "bound his spirit to the mountain, and transformed him into the thing he truly was, a beast who preyed on the innocent. He can never die, never rest, until he finds redemption." How do I stop him? Mary studied my face for a long moment. "You don't stop him, young man. You save him. But first, you must save yourself." She gave me a bundle of sacred white sage and an old peace pipe that had belonged to her great-grandfather. "Perform the forgiveness, ritual at the place where the blood was first spilled. But remember, you cannot forgive others until you forgive yourself." I drove back to Georgia that night, knowing it would probably be the last drive I'd ever make. The creature was waiting for me, and this time one of us wasn't going to leave the mountain alive. I hiked up to Blood Mountain just before dawn. The forest was still unnaturally quiet, but I could feel the creature's presence like a weight pressing down on me. It was close, watching, waiting. I found it in the stone shelter at the summit, sitting in human form with its back against the wall. It looked like a Native American man, maybe 40 years old, but there was something ancient in its eyes. "You came back," it said. "I didn't think you would." "My name is Michael Ravencrest," I said, setting down the sage and peace pipe. "I'm here to help you find peace." The creature, Sequoia, laughed bitterly. "Peace? I killed my own people for 30 pieces of silver. I betrayed everything I was supposed to protect. There is no peace for someone like me." "You're not the only one who's failed people," I said. "I let my partner die because I was scared." Sequoia's eyes seemed to focus on me for the first time. "Tell me." So I did. I told him about Danny, about the drug bust, about how I'd frozen up when Danny needed me most. I told him about running away to the mountains, about spending 6 years trying to forget what I'd done. "I've been carrying that guilt every day," I said, "just like you've been carrying yours." Sequoia stood up and I could see him changing. His human features were becoming more animal-like, his hands growing claws, his teeth lengthening into fangs. "Guilt is all I have left," he snarled. "Without it, I'm nothing." "You're wrong," I said, lighting the sacred sage with shaking hands. "Without guilt, you could be free." The smoke from the sage filled the shelter, and suddenly I could see them, dozens of Cherokee spirits standing around us in a circle. Men, women, children, all of them watching Sequoia with expressions of impulsion, finite sadness. "They're here," I whispered. Sequa saw them too. He fell to his knees, completely transformed back into the beast form. "I killed you," he roared. "I led them to you. How can you forgive me?" One of the spirits stepped forward, an old man wearing a medicine man's headdress. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We forgave you long ago, my son, but you have not forgiven yourself." "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Neither do any of us," the medicine man said gently. "That's what makes it a gift." I lit the peace pipe with trembling hands and took a draw from it. The smoke burned my lungs, but I could feel something changing in the air around us. The weight that had been pressing down on the mountain for over a century was starting to lift. "I forgive you, Sequa," I said, passing the pipe to him. "And I forgive myself." Sequa looked at the pipe in his clawed hands, then at the spirits of his people surrounding him. Slowly, carefully, he brought it to his lips and drew in the sacred smoke. As he exhaled, his body began to change again. But this time, instead of transforming from human to beast, he was becoming something else entirely. The animal features faded away, replaced by the face of the man he had been before the curse, young, strong, at peace. The Cherokee spirits smiled and began to fade away. But before they disappeared completely, the medicine man spoke one last time. "The debt is paid. Go in peace." Sequa looked at me with clear, human eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. Then he closed his eyes and was still. When the sun came up over Blood Mountain, I was alone in the shelter. Sequa's body had turned to dust that scattered on the morning breeze. The oppressive silence that had hung over the mountain for weeks was gone, replaced by the normal sounds of birds and insects. I radioed for pickup and spent the rest of the morning documenting the scene. There wasn't much to document, just the sage ashes and the peace pipe, and the deep sense that something that had been wrong was now right again. The official report listed the Blood Mountain incidents as a series of bear attacks followed by the animal's death from unknown causes. The state reopened the hiking trails 2 weeks later, and life gradually returned to normal in the Chattahoochee National Forest. But I knew the truth would follow me for the rest of my life. I took a leave of absence from the Ranger Service and drove back to Atlanta. I had work to do there, old cases to revisit, amends to make, a life to rebuild. Danny Reeves's widow, Maria, was surprised to see me at her door, but she listened when I told her what really happened that night 6 years ago. "I always wondered," she said when I finished. "Danny talked about you being scared of something. He never said what. I was scared of failing him, and because I was scared, I did exactly that." Maria was quiet for a long time. Then she put her hand on my shoulder. "Danny wouldn't want you to carry this anymore, Mick. He'd want you to use what you learned to help other people." She was right. I rejoined the Atlanta Police Department and spent the next several years working cold cases, focusing on the investigations that other detectives had given up on. I developed a reputation as someone who never quit, someone who would keep digging until he found the truth. But I also kept my job as a part-time ranger. There were other places in the mountains where the Cherokee had lived, other sites where old pain might still be trapped. I became something of a specialist in cases that didn't fit normal patterns, incidents that other investigators wrote off as animal attacks or accidents. The FBI started consulting with me on what they called anomalous crime scenes, cases where the evidence didn't match any known criminal behavior. I helped them develop protocols for investigating supernatural activity, though they never called it that in official reports. I also worked with the Cherokee Nation to identify and cleanse other cursed sites throughout the region. Mary Crowfeather became my teacher, helping me understand the rituals and traditions needed to bring peace to restless spirits. Over the years, I learned that there were more things in the world than I'd ever imagined. Not all of them were evil. Some were just lost, trapped by old pain and unable to find their way home. My job became helping them find that peace, the same way the Cherokee spirits had helped Sequa. I remarried Maria Reeves 3 years after the Blood Mountain incident. We have 2 children now, and I tell them stories about the importance of facing your mistakes and making things right. I never tell them about the creature on Blood Mountain. Some truths are too heavy for young shoulders to carry. But sometimes late at night when the wind is howling through the mountains, I remember Sekwa's words about carrying the weight of those we failed to save. I think about the hikers who died before I could stop him, and I know that some debts can never be fully paid. The difference now is that I don't run from that knowledge. I carry it with me, use it to fuel my determination to save the next person who needs help. Because I learned something important on Blood Mountain that September. Running from your responsibilities doesn't make them go away. It just makes them heavier. And in the quiet moments when I'm alone in the forest or working late on a cold case, I sometimes feel a presence watching over me. Not threatening this time, but protective. Like an old debt has been forgiven, and a friendship has been born from shared understanding of what it means to carry guilt and find redemption. The Cherokee were right about Blood Mountain being a place where blood was cried, but they were also right about something else, that even the deepest pain can be healed. Led? If we're brave enough to face it and wise enough to accept forgiveness when it's offered. The real monsters, I learned, aren't the supernatural creatures that hide in dark places. They're the parts of ourselves that we're too scared to confront, the guilt and shame that we carry until it transforms us into something we don't recognize. But the good news is that no matter how far we fall, no matter what we've done or failed to do, redemption is always possible. Sometimes it just takes a trip to the top of a cursed mountain and the courage to admit what we've been running from all along. My name is Patricia Stormwind, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been a park ranger at Daniel Boone National Forest for 5 years now, and before that, I taught elementary school. People always ask why I switched jobs, and I tell them it's because I wanted to protect these mountains. What I don't tell them is that my daddy died in a mine collapse when I was 12, and my mama coughed herself to death from black lung disease 3 years later. The coal companies took everything from my family. I became a ranger so they couldn't take any more. It was November 1976 when everything changed. The leaves had fallen and the mountains looked bare and gray under the cloudy sky. I was sitting in my office at the ranger station reading through reports when Clarence Dupree knocked on my door. Clarence volunteers with the local Boy Scout troop. Good man, been helping kids in these parts for 20 years. "Patty, we got a problem," he said, taking off his worn baseball cap. "The boys were camping up in Kfield Hollow last weekend, and they came back spooked something fierce." I looked up from my paperwork. Kfield Hollow was one of the old mining areas, abandoned since the 60s when the coal played out. Nothing up there but empty company houses and a falling down schoolhouse. "What kind of problem?" I asked. "They say they saw children up there, ghost children." Clarence shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I know how that sounds, but these boys ain't the type to make up stories. Tommy Willis, he's 14, been scouting since he was 6. He swears he saw kids playing in the ruins, says they looked hungry and cold, wearing old-timey clothes." I set down my pen. Growing up in these mountains, I'd heard plenty of ghost stories. Old-timers loved to talk about spirits in the hollows, usually after they'd been drinking. But kids were different. Kids didn't usually lie about being scared. "How many boys saw these children?" I asked. "All of them, 8 scouts and 2 other leaders. They described the same thing, children about 8 to 12 years old wearing clothes from way back, faces all smudged with coal dust. The strangest part is what they said to Tommy." "What did they say?" Clarence looked uncomfortable. "They asked him if he could help them find their way back to their mama." A chill ran down my back, but I kept my voice steady. "Could have been local kids playing pranks. You know how children like to dress up and scare each other." "That's what I thought too," Clarence said. "But there ain't no local kids that age. The nearest house to Kfield Hollow is 15 miles away, and it's rough terrain. Besides, this was near midnight when the boys saw them." I stood up and grabbed my jacket from the chair. As a ranger, I'd investigated plenty of strange reports. Most turned out to be nothing more than shadows and imagination. But I took them all seriously because people's safety was my job. "Let's go take a look," I said. Better to check it out than have scared kids avoiding a perfectly good camping spot. We loaded my truck with the usual gear: first aid kit, camera, notebook, emergency supplies. The drive to Kfield Hollow took us deep into the forest, past signs warning about unstable mine shafts and contaminated water. The narrow dirt road wound through trees that seemed to lean in closer as we climbed higher. "You ever been up here before?" Clarence asked as we bounced over a fallen branch. "Once, when I first became a ranger. Had to post some warning signs about dangerous mine openings. I remembered that visit. The place had felt wrong somehow, like a wound in the earth that hadn't healed properly. My daddy used to work these mines before they closed. Said it was the hardest work a man could do. My gosh. Randad worked here too," Clarence said quietly. "Lost his brother in the 1932 disaster. Cave-in trapped 47 people underground. They never did recover all the bodies. I'd heard about that disaster. It was one of the worst mining accidents in Kentucky history. The coal company had cut corners on safety, and when the mountain finally gave way, it buried men and children alike. Back then, kids as young as 8 worked the mines alongside their fathers. We reached the hollow just as the sun was starting to set behind the mountains. The abandoned settlement spread out before us like a ghost town. Company houses stood in crooked rows, their roofs sagging and windows dark. At the far end sat the old schoolhouse, its bell tower leaning at a dangerous angle. "Quiet up here," Clarence observed. He was right. Most places in the forest, you could hear birds or squirrels, wind in the trees, water running somewhere. But Kfield Hollow was silent, except for our footsteps on the gravel. "Let's start with the schoolhouse," I said. "That's where the boys said they saw the most activity." As we walked toward the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but all I saw were empty doorways and broken windows staring back at us like dead eyes. The schoolhouse door hung open on rusted hinges. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside with Clarence right behind me. The wooden floors creaked under our weight, and dust particles danced in our flashlight beams. "Look at this," Clarence whispered. On the far wall, someone had written words in what looked like chalk. "We want to go home." The letters were shaky, like a child had written them. "Could be from the Boy Scouts," I said. But something about the writing bothered me. The chalk looked fresh, but there was something old-fashioned about the way the letters were formed. I raised my camera to take a picture. When the flash went off, I saw something that made my blood run cold. For just a split second, the room had been full of children, dozens of them, sitting at wooden desks that weren't there anymore. They'd all turned to look at us when the flash fired. "Did you see that?" I asked Clarence. "See what?" I looked at the camera's viewfinder, but it only showed the empty room. "Nothing. Just thought I saw. Never mind." We explored the rest of the building room by room. In what used to be the teacher's office, we found more writing on the walls. Names and dates carved into the wood. Tommy Stormwind, 1924-1932. Mary Beth Collins, 1920-1932. James Porter, 1918-1932. My heart stopped when I read the first name. Tommy Stormwind. That was my uncle, my daddy's little brother who died in the mine disaster. I'd seen his picture in our family album, a skinny boy with dark hair and serious eyes. "Patty, you okay?" Clarence asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "This name here," I pointed to the carving. "Tommy Stormwind. That was my uncle. He died in the mine collapse." Clarence studied the carving. "These all have the same death date, 1932. That's when the big disaster happened." A sound from outside made us both freeze. Children's laughter, high and clear, echoing off the mountains. It lasted only a few seconds, then cut off abruptly. "Probably just the wind," I said, but my voice sounded shaky even to me. We left the schoolhouse and walked toward the old mining equipment scattered around the hollow. Rusty conveyor belts and broken machinery cast weird shadows in the dying light. Near a pile of coal tailings, Clarence found something that made him call out, "Patty, come look at this." In the soft dirt next to the coal pile were footprints, small, bare feet like children had been running around without shoes. The prints were fresh, so fresh I could see the toe marks clearly. These couldn't have been here long, I said, kneeling down to examine them. Rain would have washed them away, and we haven't had rain in 3 days. But it's November, Clarence pointed out. What kind of parents let their kids run around barefoot in this weather? I didn't have an answer for that. The temperature was already dropping as the sun went down. Any normal child would be wearing shoes and a heavy coat. I took pictures of the footprints, and this time when the flash went off, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A voice, clear as day, calling out, "Patty? Patty Stormwind? Is that you?" The voice sounded like a young boy, maybe 10 years old. "You heard that, right?" I asked Clarence. He nodded, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "Sounded like he knew you." "Tommy?" I called out. "Uncle Tommy, is that you?" Silence. Then from somewhere among the abandoned houses came the sound of running feet. Multiple children, laughing and calling to each other. The sounds got closer, then farther away, like kids playing a game of tag. "We should go," Clarence said. "It's getting dark, and this place feels wrong." I wanted to leave too, but I was a ranger. My job was to investigate and file a report. "Let's check one more building. If we don't find anything concrete, we'll head back." We walked to the nearest company house. The front door stood open, creaking softly in the breeze that had suddenly picked up. Inside, our flashlights revealed a scene that took my breath away. The house was furnished like people still lived there. A kitchen table set for dinner, with plates and cups arranged neatly. Beds made up with quilts that looked handmade. Family pictures on the walls showing people in 1930s clothing. "This is impossible," I whispered. "These houses have been abandoned for decades." Clarence picked up one of the pictures. A family portrait showing parents with 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The younger boy looked familiar. "Patty," Clarence said, his voice tight with fear. "Look at this boy. Doesn't he look like you?" He was right. The child in the picture had the same dark hair and serious eyes that I saw in my own mirror every morning. The same eyes that I'd inherited from my daddy and his family. That's when we heard the footsteps on the porch outside. Slow, careful steps, like someone trying not to make noise. Then a small voice called out, "Mama? Daddy? We're home?" More voices joined the first one. "We've been waiting so long. Where did everyone go? Why is it so dark?" The voices were getting closer to the open door. "Run!" I told Clarence. We bolted out the back door and ran for the truck, crashing through bushes and jumping over fallen logs. Behind us, the voices changed from confused to angry. "Don't leave us!" they screamed. "Don't leave us alone again!" We reached the truck and threw ourselves inside. I started the engine and gunned it down the mountain road, not caring about the rocks and potholes. In the rearview mirror, I could see shapes standing in the road behind us, small figures silhouetted against the night sky. "What the hell was that?" Clarence gasped. I didn't answer because I didn't know. All I knew was that something was very wrong in Kfield Hollow, and it seemed to know my family. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those children's voices calling my name. When morning came, I drove to the county library and asked to see the old newspaper files from 1932. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, was happy to help. She'd grown up in the area and remembered the mining disaster from when she was a girl. "Terrible thing," she said, leading me to the microfilm machine. November 15th, 1932, cave-in at the Kfield mine trapped 47 people underground. They tried for weeks to dig them out, but the whole mountain had shifted. Never did recover all the bodies. I scrolled through the newspaper reports, reading names of the victims. Tommy Stormwind, age 10. Mary Beth Collins, age 12. James Porter, age 14. Dozens of others, mostly children who worked in the mines to help support their families. One article caught my attention. Families demand answers about safety violations. The reporter had discovered that the mining company knew the tunnels were unstable, but kept them open to meet production quotas. They'd ignored warnings from their own engineers. The company covered it up, I muttered. "What's that, dear?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "Nothing. just reading about the disaster. But it wasn't nothing. Those children had died because of corporate greed, and their families had never gotten justice. The mining company had paid a small fine and moved on to other sites. The victims were buried in unmarked graves or never buried at all. I was about to leave when Mrs. Henderson brought me one more file. "You might want to see this too," she said. "It's about your family." The file contained a death certificate for my grandmother, Sarah Stormwind. She'd died in 1933, just a year after the mine disaster. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, but there was a note in the margin. Died of grief after losing her youngest son Tommy in mine collapse. I'd never known that. My daddy had never talked about how his mother died, only that she'd passed when he was young. I drove home feeling more confused than ever. The rational part of my mind said there had to be a logical explanation for what Clarence and I had experienced. Maybe some local kids were playing elaborate pranks. Maybe the stress of the job was getting to me. But deep down, I knew we'd encountered something that couldn't be explained away. The phone was ringing when I walked into my cabin. It was Clarence, and he sounded panicked. "Patty, you need to get over to the hospital right now," he said. "It's Bobby Willis, Tommy's little brother. They found him this morning up in Kfield Hollow." "What was he doing up there?" "That's the thing. Nobody knows. His parents thought he was sleeping in his room, but the rescue squad found him in one of the old mine shafts, nearly frozen to death. He keeps asking about the children who led him there." I met Clarence at the hospital. All 20 minutes later. Bobby Willis was 11 years old, a quiet kid who loved hiking and camping. He was awake, but wrapped in several blankets, his lips still blue from the cold. "Bobby," I said gently, "can you tell me what happened?" "I heard them calling," he whispered, "outside my bedroom window. They said they were lonely and wanted someone to play with." "Who was calling, honey?" "The children. They looked cold and sad, so I followed them. They led me up to the old mine, said they had toys hidden down there. But when I went inside, the entrance caved in. I was trapped." Bobby's mother, Janet Willis, looked exhausted. "The doctor says he's been missing for over 12 hours, but he swears he only followed the children for a few minutes." "What did these children look like?" I asked Bobby. "Old-fashioned clothes, like in the history books at school. Their faces were dirty, like they'd been working. The boy who talked to me said his name was Tommy. He looked just like you, Miss Patty." My blood went cold. "What did Tommy tell you?" "He said he'd been waiting a long time for his family to come back. He said his sister Patty would help him get home." I didn't have a sister, but I was the first Stormwind to return to these mountains since the disaster. In the children's minds, maybe I was close enough to family. Over the next 3 days, 2 more incidents happened. A local historian named Professor Ellis went missing while researching the mine disaster. They found him in his car at the bottom of Kfield Hollow, dead from what appeared to be a heart attack. His notebook was filled with names and dates from 1932, written in handwriting that wasn't his. Then Sarah McKinney, a social worker who'd been visiting families in the area, called the sheriff's office in hysterics. She claimed that children had surrounded her car on the hollow road, begging her to take them home. When she tried to drive away, her engine died and wouldn't restart for 2 hours. "They pressed their faces against the windows," she told me when I interviewed her. "Their eyes were
so sad, and they kept asking for their parents. But Patty, these weren't normal children. They were see-through, like looking at them through water." The sheriff's department was getting pressure to close the road to Kfield Hollow. People were scared, and the stories were spreading through the county like wildfire. But I knew closing the road wouldn't solve the problem. Those children, if that's what they were, wouldn't be stopped by a locked gate. I had to go back. This time I went alone, despite Clarence's protests. I drove up to the hollow in the middle of the day, when the sun was bright and everything looked normal. No shadows to play tricks on my eyes, no darkness to hide behind. The schoolhouse was exactly as we'd left it, but something was different. The chalk writing on the walls had changed. Now it said, "Patty, we've been waiting for you." "I'm here," I said out loud, feeling foolish but knowing I had to try. Uncle Tommy. If you're here, I need to talk to you. The air in the room grew cold. My breath started coming out in puffs, even though it was a warm day outside. Then I heard his voice, clear as if he was standing right next to me. Patty girl, you came back. I turned around, and there he was. My Uncle Tommy, exactly as he looked in the old family pictures. 10 years old, wearing overalls and a dirty work shirt. His face was smudged with coal dust, and his eyes held a sadness too deep for a child. Uncle Tommy, I whispered. You're really here. We're all here, he said. Been here since the mountain fell on us. We can't find our way home, Patty. Everything's different now. More children began to appear around him. Dozens of them, all wearing the same old-fashioned clothes, all with the same lost expression. I recognized some of their names from the newspaper reports. What do you want? I asked. We want to go home to our families, Tommy S.A. ID, but they're all gone, ain't they? Everyone we loved is gone. I nodded, tears starting to run down my cheeks. They're gone, Tommy. That was 44 years ago. We know, said a girl who looked about 12. We can feel the years passing, but we can't move on. We're stuck here, in the dark, waiting for someone to help us. What kind of help? Tommy stepped closer to me, and I could see through him to the wall behind. We need to be remembered, he said. Not just our names in some dusty newspaper, but really remembered. And we need. He paused, looking frightened. We need someone to find our bodies and give us a proper burial. The mine entrance collapsed, I said. Everyone knows that. There's a way in, Tommy insisted. Through the old ventilation shaft. But it's dangerous, Patty. The mountain could fall again. That's when I understood the true horror of their situation. These children had been trapped underground for 44 years, their bodies never recovered, their deaths never properly honored. They couldn't rest until someone cared enough to bring them home. But they were also dangerous. Their need was so strong, so desperate, that they were pulling living people into their world. Bobby Willis, Professor Ellis, Sarah McKinney, all of them had been touched by the children's hunger for connection. If I help you, I said, will you stop hurting people? We don't mean to hurt anyone, Tommy said sadly. We're just so lonely, and when we see someone who reminds us of home. He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. They couldn't control their need. They were like emotional black holes, drawing in anyone who showed them kindness or reminded them of their lost families. I'll help you, I promised. But I need time to figure out how. Tommy smiled for the first time since I'd seen him. We can wait a little longer, he said. We've got 10 good at waiting. The children began to fade away, but Tommy lingered. Patty, he said, be careful. The mine company doesn't want their secrets dug up. They'll try to stop you. Then.
He was gone and I was alone in the empty schoolhouse, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. I spent the next week researching everything I could about mine rescue operations and talking to anyone who might help. Most people thought I'd lost my mind when I explained what I wanted to do, but I finally found someone willing to listen. Jake Morrison, a mining engineer who'd worked disaster sites all over Appalachia. You want to go down into a 44-year-old collapsed mine to recover bodies? Jake asked when I met with him at a diner in town. I know how it sounds, I said, but those children deserve a proper burial. Their families never got closure. Jake studied me across the table. He was about 50, with graying hair and hands scarred from years of dangerous work. There are easier ways to honor the dead than risking your life in an unstable mine. Not for these dead, I said, and told him everything. The ghost children, the incidents with Bobby and Professor Ellis, my Uncle Tommy appearing in the schoolhouse. Jake listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. My granddad died in a mine collapse in West Virginia, he finally said. Different mine, same story. Company knew it was dangerous but kept it open anyway. I've always wondered if his spirit found peace. Will you help me? I'll survey the site, Jake agreed. If it's structurally possible, I'll help you go down. But if it's too dangerous, you have to promise me you'll let it go. 2 days later, Jake drove up to Kfield Hollow with equipment to test the stability of the old ventilation shaft. I met him there, along with Clarence, who'd insisted on coming despite his fear. The good news, Jake said after running his tests, is that the ventilation shaft is mostly intact. The bad news is that it drops straight down about 80 feet before connecting to the main tunnel system. Can we get down safely? With the right equipment, yes. Getting back up might be trickier. As we stood near the shaft opening, discussing plans, the temperature suddenly dropped. Our breath began coming out in clouds, and frost started forming on the metal equipment. They're here, I said. The children materialized around us slowly, as if they were made of morning fog. Tommy stood at the front of the group, but he looked different now. Older, sadder, more desperate. Are you going to help us? He asked. We're going to try, I said. But it's dangerous. If something goes wrong, we know about danger, said Mary Beth Collins, the 12-year-old girl. We've been living with it for 44 years. Jake stared at the ghostly children, his face pale with shock. I can see them, he whispered. I can actually see them. We trust you, Patty, Tommy said. You're family. You understand what it means to lose everything to the mines. Clarence cleared his throat. How do we know this will work? How do we know that finding your bodies will set you free? We don't, Tommy admitted. But what we're doing now isn't living. We're stuck between worlds, and it's making us hungry for what we can't have. If you don't help us soon, we might hurt more people without meaning to. As if to prove his point, our equipment started malfunctioning. Jake's electronic devices sparked and went dead. The truck engine died. Even our flashlights began to flicker. We can't control it, Mary Beth said, tears streaming down her translucent face. When we get upset or scared, things go wrong around us. We don't want to hurt anyone, but we can't help it. I made the decision right there. We go down tomorrow morning. Jake, can you have the equipment ready? I'll need to bring in help, Jake said. Professional rescue gear, safety equipment, maybe a small crew. No, Tommy said urgently. Just you three. Too many people will make the mountain angry. It still remembers what the company did to us. That night I called the county sheriff and told him what we were planning. He tried to talk me out of it, said it was too dangerous and probably pointless. But when I mentioned the incidents with Bobby Willis and the others, he agreed to have a rescue team standing by. If you're not back by sunset, we're coming in after you, Sheriff Barnes said. The next morning, Jake arrived with ropes, helmets, lights, and breathing equipment. We set up at the ventilation shaft just after sunrise, when the hollow was quiet and peaceful. Last chance to back out, Jake said as he checked our safety gear. I looked at Clarence and Jake, these two good men who were risking their lives to help children they'd never known. You don't have to do this, I told them. Yeah, we do, Clarence said. Those kids have been waiting long enough. We rappelled down the shaft one by one, our headlamps cutting through the darkness. The air got colder and thinner as we descended, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a narrow tunnel that stretched in both directions. The walls were reinforced with old wooden beams, some of which had cracked under the weight of decades. Which way? Jake asked. I closed my eyes and listened. Somewhere to our left, I could hear something that might have been crying. That way. We followed the tunnel for about 100 yards before reaching a wall of fallen rock and twisted metal. This was where the mountain had come down in 1932, sealing 47 people in their tomb. There, I said, pointing to a gap near the top of the debris pile. Can we get through? Jake examined the opening with his light. Maybe, but if this shifts while we're inside, we have to try. One by one, we squeezed through the gap into the chamber beyond. What we found there took my breath away. It was a natural cavern, much larger than the tunnel. and scattered across the floor were the remains of the miners and children who had died in the collapse. Some still wore the remnants of their work clothes. Others had been reduced to bones and metal buckles. 47 people, Clarence whispered. All this time. In one corner of the cavern, I found a small pile of bones that could only belong to a child. Next to them lay a rusted lunch pail with the initials TS scratched into the metal. Uncle Tommy, I said, kneeling down next to the remains. The air in the cavern suddenly warmed, and I felt a presence beside me. Not frightening this time, but peaceful. Thank you, Tommy's voice whispered. Thank you for coming for us. We need to get you all out of here, I said. You and all the others. We know. But Patty... What? The company men are coming. They know what you're doing, and they don't want their secrets exposed. That's when we heard voices echoing down the tunnel. Adult voices, angry and authoritative. Looks like we've got company, Jake said grimly. Through the gap in the debris, I could see lights approaching. 3 men in expensive suits, accompanied by what looked like private security. Miss Stormwind, one of them called out. This is private property. You're trespassing. I recognized the voice. Charles Brennan, the current CEO of Consolidated Mining, the company that had absorbed the original Kfield operation. These are human remains, I called back. These people deserve a proper burial. That mine collapse was investigated and closed 44 years ago, Brennan replied. The legal matter is settled. What about the moral matter? Jake shouted. We heard scuffling sounds, then Brennan's voice again. You have 10 minutes to come out peacefully, or we'll seal this entrance permanently. They can't do that, Clarence said. Can they? They can do whatever they want, I said. They have money and lawyers. We just have the truth. But the truth wasn't going to get us out of this cave alive. That's when the children appeared. Not just Tommy and a few others, but all 47 of them. They filled the cavern with a cold, blue light, their faces set with determination. They hurt us once, Tommy said. They won't do it again. The temperature in the tunnel plummeted. We could hear the men outside shouting in confusion as their equipment began failing. Lights went out, radios died, and something heavy crashed to the ground. Now, Tommy told us, while they're distracted. We gathered up as many remains as we could carry and made our way back through the gap. The tunnel was pitch black except for our headlamps, but I could feel the ghost children guiding us toward the ventilation shaft. Behind us, Brennan was screaming orders. Get those lights working! Find another way in! But his men were too busy dealing with equipment failures and unexplained accidents. One of them fell into a sinkhole that hadn't been there minutes earlier. Another got lost when his compass started spinning wildly. We reached the shaft and began hauling up the remains of the 47 victims. It took 3 trips, with the ghost children helping us carry their own bones toward the light. When we finally emerged from the mine, we found Sheriff Barnes waiting with the rescue team and a coroner's van. Brennan and his men were nowhere to be seen. Looks like the mining company executives had some kind of accident, the sheriff said with a slight smile. Their vehicles wouldn't start, and they got confused trying to find their way out of the hollow. We sent them back to town. As the coroner carefully loaded the remains into body bags, I felt a hand touch my shoulder. Tommy stood there, smiling peacefully. We can go home now, he said. Thank you, Patty girl. Thank you for not forgetting us. One by one, the ghost children began to fade away, their faces bright with relief and gratitude. The last thing I heard was the sound of children laughing, not the desperate, haunting laughter we'd heard before, but the joyful sound of kids who were finally free to play. The funeral for the 47 victims was held 2 weeks later in the Kfield Community Cemetery. People came from all over the county, descendants of the original families, former miners, anyone who had been touched by the tragedy. Each victim was buried in a marked grave with their name and dates clearly carved in stone. Tommy Stormwind's headstone included a line that I had chosen, "Finally home." During the service, Pastor Williams read the names of all 47 victims. When he spoke Tommy's name, I felt a warm breeze touch my face, even though it was a still day. The mining company tried to fight us in court, claiming we had stolen their property and violated safety regulations. But the public outcry was too strong. Newspapers across the state picked up the story, and suddenly everyone was asking why it had taken 44 years to give these people a decent burial. An investigation revealed that Consolidated Mining had known about the ghost sightings and had been quietly paying to keep people away from Kfield Hollow. They'd been afraid that publicity about the disaster would lead to lawsuits and bad press. 3 months after the funeral, the company agreed to establish a memorial fund for families of mining accident victims. It wasn't justice, but it was something. As for me, the experience changed everything. I could no longer pretend that the world was a purely rational place. I'd seen proof that some injustices echo across generations, that love and loss can be powerful enough to anchor souls to the earth. I became something of an expert on what the Park Service quietly calls historical trauma sites, places where terrible events have left spiritual impressions that affect the living. I've investigated similar cases in old logging camps, abandoned railroad towns, and forgotten industrial sites across Appalachia. The network of rangers who deal with these situations is small but growing. We share information carefully, always respecting both the living and the dead. Kfield Hollow is peaceful now. The Park Service has designated it as a historical site, with interpretive signs telling the story of the mining disaster and the 47 people who died. School groups visit to learn about mining history and worker safety. Sometimes on quiet days when I'm up there checking the memorial, I think I hear children's laughter echoing off the mountains. But it's different now, light and free, the sound of kids who are finally at play instead of trapped in darkness. The last time I saw Uncle Tommy was on the anniversary of the disaster, 1 year after we'd laid him to rest. He appeared briefly near his grave, looking peaceful and older somehow, as if he'd been allowed to grow up in whatever place he'd moved on to. "Thank you, Patty girl," he said, just like he had in the mine. "You kept your promise." Then he faded away, and I knew he wouldn't be back. His work was done, and so was mine, at least in Kfield Hollow. But there are other places in these mountains where the dead still wait for someone to remember them, someone to care enough to bring them home. The coal companies and timber barons and railroad builders left a lot of unfinished business behind when they moved on to easier profits. My daddy used to say that the mountains never forget. Now I know he was right. The mountains remember everything, every life lost, every family destroyed, every promise broken. They hold on to these memories until someone comes along who's willing to listen. I'm still listening. And when I hear the voices of the forgotten calling out from abandoned hollows and ruined settlements, I answer. Because someone has to remember. Someone has to care enough to dig up the truth, no matter how deep it's buried or how powerful the people who want it to stay hidden. The children of Kfield Hollow taught me that some debts can never be paid with money. Some wounds can only be healed with love, respect, and the simple act of bearing witness to suffering. Every time I visit their memorial, I leave a small bouquet of mountain laurel, the same flowers that bloom wild in these hills each spring, beautiful and resilient despite growing in poisoned soil. The dead sleep peacefully now. But I remain awake, watching and listening, because I know there are other children out there in other abandoned places, waiting for someone to remember their names and bring them home. That's my job now. That's what I do. And I wouldn't have it any other way.